Okay, mate. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll start in a few minutes, but in the meantime, it'd be great to know who's joined us. So in the Q&A box, if you just leave your name and the company you're calling from, and we'll give you a quick shout out. If you joined us for any of our other webinars over the last week or so, this will become a bit the norm for you guys. But like I said, we'll start in a few minutes. So yes, good morning, everyone. We've had a message or two. Good morning to Sally from JM Heathford Limited again. Yes, hello, Sally. Good welcome. So if there's anyone else who's joined us, please leave your name, the company you're calling from. Like I said, it'd be great to see who's joining us. Good morning, Dan. Good morning to you too as well. I am Dan as well. That was a bit confusing. So yes, good morning and welcome to today's webinar. So this webinar is about building and administering your perfect team's environment. Before we get started into the main crux of today's presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about BCN Group because I'm conscious that some of you may or may not be aware as to who we are. But before I do that, I'd like to say who you're joined by. So yes, my name's Dan Felix. I am your host for today. I am one of the marketing managers here at BCN Group, and I'm joined by Mark Knight, who will be your main speaker for today. Like I said, I just want to talk a little bit about BCN Group because I'm conscious that some of you may or may not be aware of who we are as a business. What we are, we're a complete managed IT solutions provider. We're not just we don't just focus on modern workplace. We don't just focus on infrastructure like some IT providers out there. We are a full IT managed service provider. We believe IT has that holistic approach. We deal with cloud infrastructure, with telecoms, with DevOps, with application development, with security. Technology now is linked to lots of other things. They're all intrinsically linked to each other, and that's what the approach that we take. We're financially owned, we're independently owned, and we're financially a sound organisation. We're a private business, and we are accredited with some very important security accreditations and process accreditations. For instance, ISO 27001, 9001, Cyber Essentials. We're also an approved Crown commercial services provider, and we also just over 1,000 clients. We support over 30,000 users. We're based across five sites across the entire north of England. We're a Microsoft Direct CSP partner. We have world-class technical support, Net Promoter Score of 89%, which is way higher than the industry average, and our customer retention rate is 98%. Like I said at the start, we're a holistic approach to technology. As you can see, all the services we offer, across everything: platform, protect, collaborate, development, IT consultancy. Like I mentioned at the start, we believe technology is intrinsically linked with each other. In order to have great collaboration, you need to host your environment somewhere. You need to have protection as well as your data remain secure. You might need some development. So you can see what I'm trying to do then, building that bigger picture. Everything we do, though, is encompassed by our managed IT support services. Our IT support team is the biggest team within the business. We have around about 200 members of staff, and around about 65 to 70% of those people are in a technical based role, and within that 60 to 70%, alone, the vast majority of that is actually made up of a support desk or a support service function, whether that's first line, second line, escalation, or on-site support. As I mentioned earlier on, we've got a number of accreditations across the board. We're a Microsoft Gold Partner. We'll talk more about that shortly. We're ISO 27001, 9001, Cyber Essentials, Crown Commercial Service Supplier, and we're also, Disclosure and Barring Service accredited as well. From a technical point of view, I know I've mentioned a couple of times now, we take that approach. Technology is a holistic approach that everything's intrinsically linked. So we're partners with Ring Central, Ring Night partner. We're the first in the UK. We're also now recently declared one of their preferred partners. Their preferred partners for selling Ring Central. We're a Microsoft Gold partner, as I mentioned earlier on, which is very prevalent in today's webinar, focusing on Teams. We have 6 accreditations across the board, including application development, cloud platform, Teams, basically everything, all the major Microsoft Gold accreditations. Security-wise, we're partnered with Fortinet, WatchGuard, SonicWall. Infrastructure and connectivity with M24/7, Zen. More security end user with Sophos and ESET and Viper. Very similar link to today's call. We're partners with Yealink and Poly, and then you've got infrastructure across the bottom there with Dell and HP. And then looking at some of the customers that we work with. Technology can benefit all business, no matter of size, turnover, and age. We work with enterprise, mid-market, and small businesses, and you've got a number there of businesses that we partner with, we work with. Some of them they'll just take, we'll just do some application development with them. For instance, London Stansted Airport. We'll do a fully managed services with like the Metro rod, where they take every part of our service offering that we offer. Country Baskets and Fairway are just infrastructure partners. So you can start to see that actually the services we can give, they can either be standalone services or everything included. And then the approach that we take, we're conscious that every business is different. We're also conscious that technology is changing all the time. We see it with Teams. There was a quick adoption of Microsoft Teams very early on last year when we had to all start working from home a lot more due to the ongoing pandemic. But that's also evolving. Teams is launching new stuff all the time, and therefore our approach to technology and delivering service matches that. From that discover propose phase where we're having those initial conversations about what you're looking for. We provide services based on what you want and not on our own agenda. We transform and adapt. We take that technology you're looking for, all those technologies you're looking for, and look to help transform and transform your business with that, and therefore adapt the way everyone uses technology. And then underpinned by that is that manage evolve. Like I said, technology is constantly changing, so therefore your services will constantly change and evolve. We'll help you manage that process and evolve your business as well. And that just keeps going back through. That's in an infinity circle, effectively, where that process will continue to go on and on and on. So just before I hand over to Mark, I'll quickly touch upon today's agenda and what we're going to be covering. So what is Microsoft Teams? What makes it tick? The 10 questions that you should be asking yourself. What is Teams sprawl? How could you get better control of your team's environment, permissions, build an environment that works for you. We'll also touch upon security and compliance within Teams and questions. If you've been on any of our other webinars, I always say that actually these are a complete interactive session. We want to make sure, Mark and I want to make sure you go away with all the information you need. So please feel free to ask questions all the way through. We'll come to them at the end. We've also got some links, some interesting articles, and then also what we can do in terms of that next step. But without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mark.
Thank you very much, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Right, yes, so as Dan said, today's agenda, Teams. Let's jump straight in and kick off. What is Microsoft Teams? A lot of you are probably using it. A lot of you have pushed it out against your organizations, probably at force, to help with the whole home working, work from anywhere environment. But very rarely do people understand what exactly makes Microsoft tick under the bonnet. Well, I mean, you've got a Microsoft team. I love this slide. So team, your very first element, which is the team's interface, be it chat, channels, individual chats, activations, meetings, whatever it is, it's Microsoft Teams. That's just a front-ended application. There's no data stored within Teams itself. It's just a pretty shop window, for better of a word. What underpins it is its applications. So we've got chat. Well, that is stored and run on Microsoft Exchange. We've got files, again, stored and run on OneDrive and SharePoint. Your meetings and your recorded meetings, be it chat or video, are all stored using Microsoft Stream, but also using OneDrive and SharePoint. Your meetings, Exchange. It's a calendar event. It's no different to the old days of just sending a meeting request in your diary. It's just, given a fresh approach to it. And then the applications. Well, you can effectively connect it to anything these days. Your third-party connectors to Teams are only limited by the API stack that it runs. But then underpinning everything there is the Microsoft 365 group or the distribution list. If you're a techie, you're old school from on-premise days, distribution lists run the world. It's no different from Microsoft Teams. 365 groups now operates the entire Teams environment. That's brilliant because that gives you control over your teams. Underpinning everything, of course, are the Microsoft Teams apps. So I spent 10 minutes literally trying to find all the logos for the teams. They've been updated recently, so it took a bit of finding. There is now 125 different Microsoft app logos or apps that within the 365 ecosystem, just as a front-ended, never mind all the little back-end apps that they've built and bots that help your day-to-day. I could spend all day filling a page full of them, but you can see what the sorts of things that Teams is built on and uses. But what is Teams? Well, for those of you who don't know it, I've got a very short video, no audio, but effectively go through it. Teams is a productivity platform in its heart. Video meetings, meet anyone, anywhere, anytime. Up to 49 9x9 gridding. We can do email chat instead of doing emails, share GIFs, share emojis. We can do polls in there. We can do forms. We can do interactive communication. And then, of course, we can collaborate. We can collaborate on shared documents from our OneDrive, from SharePoint, or from your native PC. We can collaborate in real time together on the same document, all within Teams. And then, of course, calling. Be it internal or external based calling can be done from Teams. Your voicemails are all brought in. You've got the speech to text translation, and also your contacts. So we can SBC existing phone systems into Teams, using Teams as that single client for everything every day. Teams sprawl. What is it and how can it help? It's quite a new word. A lot of people may have heard it. Some of you probably won't have. A lot of people don't understand it. Well, sprawl is quite simple. It's content sprawl, for a better word. It's when users can create teams on demand with no governance or processes in place. A lot of organizations would have done this right at the start because here's Teams. Go and run away with it. It's a place you can chat, you can store files, and you can have meetings on. Brilliant. Okay. And then you have 120 users all wanting to create a team. There's no real reason for it. A lot of it is, well, I want to test it, I want to play with this feature. And all of a sudden, we've got 120 teams. Well, Teams is driven by Microsoft's infrastructure and 365 groups. Great, now I've got 120 Office 365 distribution list groups. I've got 120 SharePoint sites. I've now got a headache, for better of a word, from an IT perspective, but also your users are now starting to get confused where everything is. We're starting to get a headache from it all. So it's understanding that and understanding Team Sprawl that we can help our users. It's not about stopping it. That's the biggest thing. It's about minimizing Team Sprawl or Content Collab. It's not about getting rid of it and bolting down the system so hard that your users cannot operate. That's not the point of the application tool. Teams was built as a collaboration platform. And then as IT admins, we're going to go, right, we're going to lock everyone out of making any changes or collaborating within a collaboration platform. I'd say it's like buying a car, locking the doors and never unlocking it to let anyone in. It's a bit pointless. So what can you do? Well, over the course of the next hours, I'm going to go through and try and change the tone of how to help your users, how to reduce and minimize that sprawl effect. Roll out new platform software, make sure it communicates properly, make sure there are governance and policies and procedures in place, make sure you've got data loss in there, make sure we understand what we're trying to push to our users. Well, I mean, to start with, think about the things that it can do. Mind taking away stuff from people. What can you do with it? Well, we can record meetings like this one now. This one's being recorded. My voice is being translated into text. If you've got captions turned on the webinar at the moment, you'll see that it does it pretty well. If people know me before, my speech is never great. I tend to rattle off quite quickly, but it understands me. And what that will do is then transcribe all of that into Word or Excel, depends what we want to do, which we can then save in the SharePoint, or we can deliver when we put this video on YouTube later. We'll then do the translation and deliver as a text file. So we've got Content Collab, and this is using Teams. Now, we can put training in there. And funny enough, me and Dan were talking about this just before the webinar, is about doing training, not necessarily training as in understanding how to use a product stack, but training around marketing specifically, about what we're doing in this quarter for marketing. So I'd want to create a training site specific to it. You can create many different things in there. Again, it's reducing the demand. Creating a training site with lots of videos probably take a day to do. But actually, the knock-on effect is it's saved 10, 15 days of Dan's time to do the same thing 10 times over. Well, we're creating better application stacks. We can create training catalogs, people's personal development, instructor-led training. We're creating systems within Teams without having to go out to create more apps. This is all sort of stuff built into it. Transcripts within meetings itself. So you can do note minutes and take meeting minutes as well. Here's one that I built myself as an RSS feed directly into our cloud connectivity team. So every time there's an outage across all of OpenReach's systems, we get just an RSS feed to let us know which sites are down. It doesn't necessarily mean we've got customer issues. It just tells us that there are problems in that area. It's a forewarning system. And then, of course, you can delete email delivery. So this is one within our teams again. We use RingCentral, and part of RingCentral's multi-factor is an email activation or access code that's sent to a shared mailbox in our 365 environment. And as Dan said, we've got over 120 support staff. Don't really want to give 120 support techs a shared mailbox, just because of logistics as much as anything else. It's far easier for us to set up a dynamic forwarder from that shared mailbox to Teams. So every time that the security code is sent to that shared mailbox, it forwards it to Microsoft Teams as a chat, making it really easy for our support techs just to pick up that access code. It doesn't forward any other content in that mailbox, just the access codes. So trying to break this down for you. 10 questions you should ask yourself when deploying Teams. Some customers embrace themselves in self-service capabilities, allowing all their users to create teams at will. Others are fearful and want to lock it down, make sure there's no unnecessary creations or duplicates or inappropriate teams or teams on top of teams that are doing nothing. Controlling it is easy. We've got lots of applications within Microsoft that help. So biggest one is the content creation permissions within O365 groups. Again, like I said, Microsoft Teams is built using groups. So if we control groups, we can control teams. The quickest and easiest way to do that is to create a team. So this is a really simple bot that we've put into Microsoft Teams here, and it's called the Request a Team bot. And effectively all you do is you fill in the blanks, or as an end user, you fill in the blanks. You do an availability check, make sure the name's not being used. So we're making sure we haven't got duplicates and we've got individualism. Giving it a bit of a description, business name, we can add some information, the team members in, and I'll let them know. From there, then we've then got an approval list. So we've now got control as an IT administrator. I'm no longer receiving 50 emails to create teams or 50 emails from 50 different people to create one team. I've just got one list that I'm managing. On top of that, I could put a power flow on top of this that automatically does it. So when I hit approve, it goes away, creates the team with all the relevant information. I haven't had to do anything. I'm saving time. But then, of course, you can still override that. You can still have individual people or super users who can create teams for you or on behalf of other people. If you do have that permission, you've got a pretty blue box at the top right side that says create a team. If you haven't, you can't. what do you want your team? Do you want your teams to have similar naming conventions? A really good one is a lot of people want to prefix, like BCN. Everything within BCN, as you can appreciate, is BCN abbreviated. Well, you can do the exact same thing. So we can have a prefix on all of our naming policies. So we can do BCN-sales, BCN-marketing. Gives it a very easy and unified approach to the way that users are creating teams. It's an enforced action. They can't override it. And similarly, they can't use naughty words. You know, you can't add silly words after the BCN prefix because Microsoft already knows a general list of words that shouldn't be used. But of course, you can add in specific policies in here and add block words in. So you've got control. How long do you want your teams to exist? Really good one. Some people will want teams just for a particular project. BCN, again, we do it quite regularly. Certain projects will have a project team. I'm part of projects teams as well. We'll take part in that project, see it through to delivery, to implementation and closure. Well, once that project's been delivered, what are we going to do with that team? It's just going to sort of sit there not doing anything. So you can put it into expiry. So you can set an expiration date on these teams that they're only there for 180 days. Then they will go to expiry. Now, expiry doesn't mean deletion. It just means it gets put into archive or then into soft delete. Again, it's dependent on us and on what we set it to do. If we put it in soft delete, it means it'll sit in the background service in archive for 30 days and then become removed from the server entirely. So we're doing automatic cleanup at the same time. We can also have notifications. So as a team manager or a team owner, I'd want to know what teams of mine are due for expiry soon. You know, I don't want to be working in a team and collaborating with projects and all of a sudden the team's then marked for deletion. And that's the last thing we want to do. So we can put forewarnings in so we can understand when these things are coming to expire. But then how long do you want to retain that data stored in a team? Like I said, the team, if it's existing, will only exist for a certain amount of time. Once it's gone, you push it into soft delete and closure. Well, you need to think about how long you want to store it for. You know, retention versus deletion, retention versus duplication and backup. There's a clear difference here. You know, for example, you can accomplish retention in policies in 3 different ways: Teams chat, Teams conversation, and O365 group content. O365 group content applies to all the content within the team, the group mailbox, the SharePoint site, and the document library. Teams conversation, so obviously it's just the conversational history that text back into, and the Teams chat is the individual chat history, one-to-one, one-to-many. They're not all the same. They don't have to be the same. You can have different retention periods. Some organizations will want retention based on legal requirements. Really good example of this is education. I come from a public sector background, so I'm an educational sector specifically. All content stored within the organization has to be for the life of the child, which is 70 years plus now. So that means that we have to keep hold of the data effectively forever. It's far easier to say forever than 70 years because that's a very, very long time in IT. So we need to think about retention and long-term retention. Olden days was go and shove it in the salt mines in a filing cabinet and forget about it forever. These days we can't do that. We can't just store it on a hard drive and stick it in a drawer and forget about it. It's not as easy as that. You know, we've got to think about things in a logical manner. But then on top of that, you've also got to think about, well, what am I doing long-term my 365 tenant? What am I doing long-term my users? So Microsoft, of course, will only look after your data for as long as your users or your tenant is licensed to do so. It's a funny fact, really, that Microsoft don't actually have backup. It's one of those famously unknown knowns that Microsoft doesn't do backups of their environments. It's a bit illogical to say that because obviously they do, but it's not a backup. It's a deduplication and replication across their entire global infrastructure so that your data, for example, stored in the UK data center is replicated to the EU data center. So should the UK have a problem and data center go down, you're automatically redirected to your second subset of data. And they actually have multiple redundancies for that. But we've got to think about a redundancy and a backup and not necessarily the same thing. And that you might actually want to be getting rid of that fear that if you become unlicensed for whatever reason, you unlicense your users leave your organization, you need to keep hold of that data long term. So we partner with Veeam, as an example here, to offload all of the Microsoft 365 data. So that's your Exchange, your groups, all of that data out of the Microsoft ecosystem. Now, ironically, you can push it over to Azure, which has a different subset of requirements and data and backup and retention and everything else. Or you can move it off platform and stick it on a server on premise. With Veeam, it keeps hold of things like the metadata, so it can be restored really easily. It's not like taking the files off the server and sticking them on a USB pen encrypted and sticking them in a drawer. It's not about that at all. So you need to think about how long you want to retain that data for and how. But then once you've got that data, we've stored it for a very long time. What about protection? How long do you how are we going to protect your confidential, the sensitive data? All our users are creating lots and lots of data. We'll have a marketing team. Well, that marketing team may well have email lists, distribution lists that we legitimately keep hold of. But of course, that's got personal and sensitive data in there. Now, we don't want anyone going in and just accidentally or purposely sharing that out to external partners, providers. There's obvious reasons for that. So we can put data loss prevention mechanisms in place that identify sensitive data across all the locations. So Teams just being the shop window, we want to be looking in Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, in your third-party apps as well. Even go as far as looking at your on-prem data sources on the desktop machines of people's PCs within the local Excel and Word. So DLP will help you do that. What does DLP do? In a nutshell, it effectively scans the documents for known words, known wording criteria or sets of numbers that can be attributed to a certain function. So for example, credit card numbers are almost always 4 digits, space 4 digits, space 4 digits. Well, Microsoft Teams can automatically recognize that number pattern and say, well, you've got a sensitive document type there. I'm going to apply a DLP tag to it, which is confidential financial data. Do not destroy, do not share, and do not distribute. And once that tag's been attributed to that document automatically, it then means I can't print it. Or if I do print it, it becomes watermarked as confidential. I can't share it or save it to a USB pen. I can't even save as and try and manipulate the document to do something else with it. So you've got proper controls in place. But then you can monitor that, using Azure Security and Management Center. You can manage those document and data types. And do you want to allow guests or non-employees to be member of your teams? I get asked this one quite frequently. Is, well, I want to communicate with an external partner. We do it ourselves quite frequently. We'll communicate with you as our customers. So I need to have guest access on. But then, do I want to have full access for my users to communicate with guests? Now, what I mean by full access is, do I want to share documents with them? Probably not, because again, DLP, other factors in place. Probably don't want to do document sharing. It's a communications tool for them primarily. So we can do that. We can put collaboration restrictions in, so we can allow invitations to be sent to one, some, or whitelisted domains only. We're fully in control of what we can do. We can use the guest inviter role, so we can guest user access restricted to properties and memberships. So what that will do is, if you are a member of a particular group or subset of groups, you can only see and share all the data within that particular group. You can't see anything else within our environment. But on top of that, we can also look at SharePoint, OneDrive. I quite often share documentation from my OneDrive, particularly onboarding documents and marketing and sales information, internally and externally. So I want to make sure I keep hold of those shares. Well, by sharing a document, I keep hold of that data. But on top of that, of course, you can then look at doing things like guest access review. It's a new feature. It's a new and advanced feature by Microsoft. It requires what we call Active Directory AD Premium, or Plan 2 specifically, and it'll allow you to put team owners in control of managing their own guests. So in an example, I look after all cloud connectivity. I might have 20 guests in that cloud connectivity team. Now, I don't want the rest of BCN to manage that team. There's no point. They don't know who's in there. They don't know those guests. Those guests might be someone unknown. They might be someone that we work with on a day in, day out basis. So I manage that as a manager. I'll manage that specific subset of teams. Or on top of that, if you're federating and you work very closely with different organizations that are not within your tenant. Perfect example is BCN Group. We are an acquiring house, so we've acquired multiple companies. I come from Polymorph, and we still have our own tenant, although we don't really use it anymore because we're pretty much completely integrated. In the early days, we needed to speak with BCN and communicate with BCN Group as Polymorph. So what we did, we created what we call a business-to-business extranet, which effectively allows our Office 365 identity tenant to speak to another Office 365 identity tenant. Now you might say, well, we can already do that with guests, but what you can't do with guests is do real-time sharing or collaboration or enroll in teams or add yourself to teams or have access for workflow approvals with B2B. You can. Again, there's a requirement in terms of licensing, but it removes burdens, so we don't have to create forests or add more users or have duplicate identities. You can create real-time sharing. So it's understanding that element as well. Do you need to have your users, do you have the need for your users to chat with people outside your company? A bit about what I've just spoken about then, but then it's understanding as well, do I want to be adding them as members or guests? So again, if you're coming from Skype or Skype on-prem or Skype for Business, any federations you've already got and you're moving up to Teams, they'll migrate across as well. So if you've already done this sort of external access federation sharing, things are going to be really easy. But within Teams, you can turn that external access on or off, depending on what you need to do. And it's also worth mentioning as well that Skype for Business officially is end of life on the 31st of July this year. On that date, all official support for Skype for Business online and on-prem will be pulled. However, long-term support for the on-premise 2019 setup will be supported until October 2025. But there will be no longer any feature roll-ups or major bug fixes. So there'll be small patch fixes only. So it's really a good time to start thinking about, right, well, let's do this migration now, particularly if you're still using 2 different tenants. And if you are using 2 different tenants, how do we work that? Well, there's 2 different modes. You've got your Teams only or your individual mode. You've got islands, or you've got what we call coexist. Coexistence mode, of course, is that you can use both Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams together. Particularly good if you're still using the on-premise version of Skype. Now, like I say, it's a very good time to migrate up and think about how we're going to migrate, because when you move from one to the other, you need to change your coexistence. And this is particularly prevalent if you're looking at doing Microsoft Teams calling or using the calling features externally within Teams, because you have to move to a Teams only mode to actually allow the calling to fully work. It will work in Islands mode, but there are certain features that are unavailable to Teams users. So you have to think very carefully about that. And then, of course, distribution lists. Who would benefit from having distribution lists? Again, if you've got an existing on-prem system and you're synchronizing with Office 365, you may have hundreds of distribution lists that you think, well, some of them might benefit from having Teams abilities. Or what you can do is you can actually upgrade your existing distribution groups to Office 365 groups. And then, of course, once they're Office 365 groups, they then have the abilities within Teams, or the Teams abilities, so you can create particular sections, create shared chat, shared mailboxes, all that sort of stuff. And it's really easy to migrate them up by a few clicks of a button. So it's understanding that as well. Now, of course, if you've got existing O365 groups or SharePoint sites specifically here, the recommendation that we would say is that think about SharePoint. It's a fantastic tool, absolutely brilliant tool, depending on how much you've customized it. Well, if you spent a lot of money building SharePoint intranets or extranets or documents, collaboration sites, and then all of a sudden everyone's using Teams, well, we need to cross functionality here. So what you can do is push SharePoint with modifications into Teams as a SharePoint site. so that you're still viewing SharePoint in its raw format and all the benefits that brings, but within the Teams client. That means if you've got an intranet, you can share that intranet. Or if you've got business updates or news strategy planning information or document sharing like Document, we can push that into. Also create flows as well. So it's understanding how Microsoft can be adapted to work. So one of the most powerful features of Microsoft's ecosystem is the Power App and the Power Flow. So you can create, I showed you at the beginning there, the approval lists. Well, approval lists is just one of probably 150 different types of app and flow that you can push in without needing particular coding experience. They're all available in the Microsoft repository, and I'll share some links out at the end of the webinar when you get your documentation. Just around how to create these application stacks and how to modify your environment or give your users control over their elements of the environment. But then, of course, how to organize teams and channels, particularly aimed at end users and giving them an understanding of how they can do it. Well, we'd all like to have a really organized environment. We'd also like to support our users in that environment creation. I'd love to have a really structured Teams environment internally. It's not, because life doesn't work like that. But it's good for your users to understand what the difference is, because there are different types of team, different types of channel, different types of chat. You've got your standard team, which can be org-wide, personal, or specific. You've got channels, which standard channels, it's an open collaboration. You've also got private channels. When you think about that, well, that's all driven with SharePoint permission structures. So, for example, we could have an all-company team, but then within that team, I've got a marketing channel. Well, that's only specifically to the marketing distribution group, or the marketing 365 group, and I'm using SharePoint permission structures to do that, to create private channels. But then we might have a couple of standard open channels for everyone, and then a standard chat. So it's understanding around, or your users understanding around, what difference is between these application stacks. It's also important to remember that all conversations and chats within Teams are archived and are searchable from an IT manager perspective. You can use eDiscovery, particularly designed as a litigation tool or internal search tool for particular reasons, but it is also very good as well if you need to do a checkup on who's been doing what in Teams, understanding what's going on within your environment. So you can use things like that as well. You can also let your end users hide teams. This is a very simple one. Hiding teams is brilliant. It doesn't delete the team, and it is particularly good if you're using teams on an ad hoc basis, particular teams. So hiding it effectively will just push that into hidden items. But on top of that, you can also hide particular tabs within there, or particular channels within that team. So, for example, I've got one for our support desk. I'm not part of service, but I do, on periodic occasions, need to go in. Well, some of the teams I'm not interested in, don't need to see, so I can hide some of the ones I don't need to see really easily. You don't have to be a manager. You only have to be a member of that team to do this, because it only changes your individual view. So it's nothing major. It's just an individualized experience for those users. On top of that, though, you could also create flows to request the closure of teams and channels. So again, using Power Apps and Flow and forms in this case, create a really simple form that requests the closure of teams, does a search, finds all the teams in your environment in a list format. They select the particular team or channel they want to request deletion of, and that submits as an approval for you as IT admins. So you can then request the closure of that particular environment. We've got fantastic collaboration experiences now. We understand what our environment needs to do. We understand what we need to do to our environment. But then about security, security is the number one thing that we have to think about these days, particularly with everyone working from home. I'm not a security expert. We leave that to our security team, but I work very closely with them, and I am very conscious of needing to make sure that everything we do has a security aspect to it, and certainly has that thought in forefront in it. Securely collaborating with files. That's the number one. We need to access shared files really easily. Make sure all files that are referenced in channels are available in the files menu. They're all backed up by SharePoint and then maybe backed up by Veeam after that. We can open in Word Online or in Word or edit in Teams these days. Once you've done that, we can then securely collaborate with more than one person at the same time. Note that the document hasn't gone anywhere. The document's still in your own SharePoint environment or your own OneDrive. The fact that we're sharing it just gives people a link to view. And it'll only work for those intended recipients that you push in there. However, if you do the copy or link, anyone you send that link to will dynamically have access. And again, you can restrict these particular things as well. Protecting your sensitive information using endpoint DLP. I know I talked about it earlier in the presentation, but what I'd like to do is just show you a very short video around DLP, because it is a fantastic tool within Office 365 to help you secure your environments. The larger our environment gets, the more complicated and more digitized our environment gets within Teams, the harder it would be as an IT admin to manage this. So we need to have tools that will do it for us. Okay, apologies for that. I think the audio has stopped. I've had problems recently with the audio. Just bear with me, sorry.
Data loss prevention policy within Microsoft Information Protection gives a wide variety of ways to protect your files as they're moved from the cloud onto device endpoints, something that we're all doing much more often in today's remote and hybrid work environment. We can edit the rules and policies and see a number of scenarios where we can proactively control access to our company's sensitive information. Now, looking at the Windows devices, I have a number of new options available within DLP that I can audit, block, or block with override, such as copying to the clipboard or USB, printing, or data upload to unallowed applications. Now, the Activity Explorer then lets us monitor these activities by category to see what's happening live. And here's what it looks like when a user triggers a DLP policy by copying information in a sensitive file. It's blocked, and the user is notified of the DLP action along with an explanation of the policy.
So you can see there that DLP is a fantastic tool for controlling your environment dynamically. It means you don't have to do anything as an IT admin to actively manage the data that's in your environment. All you need to do is actively manage the policies that manage the data. It's also really good to say that DLP works across your estate, regardless whether you're using Teams, if you're using Word on-premise, Word online, Word on Mac, Word on any other device, it's still the same. And it's not limited to just Word, it's Excel, PowerPoint, Publisher, OneNote, InfoPath, everything. It's your entire architecture within Office 365. And not only that, it also bleeds across to Microsoft Azure side. So if you've got Azure databases or Azure share lists or storage repositories or even a remote desktop environment, it's the same security policy on top as well. So it is a fantastic tool. Backed up by that, of course, you've got Defender ATP, advanced analytics and single site conditional based access, and they all work together as one application stack. So the beauty of O365 is everything is together. So I mean, what have I discussed today? Well, I've gone through, how Teams is a fantastic tool to start with. It's brilliant for collaboration, but our users can run away with it really easily. I'm guilty of this. I have created sites at the thought of, brilliant, I'll use that, and then I've never used it, never shared it, but then it's ended up in our tenant as a spare site. Now, as an IT admin, I have no idea whether someone needed it or not, and my administrators will go, well, you need to tell me whether it's useful or not. It's creating more work. So again, thinking about how we can put restrictions in place, but enough restriction to still make it a really collaborative tool. How we can upgrade our groups, existing distribution lists into Office 365 groups, and how to build off that. Now, what we can do as a group, or BCN group can do for you, is we can support you on that journey. It's a digital transformation piece. It's not just a single project, it's an entire transformation journey. We can design and implement solutions. As Dan said, we have many strings to our bow these days. We can deliver SharePoint solutions bespoke to your organization. We can have help and look at individual particular app request suites, third-party application interfaces, bots and chats. I saw one yesterday that was a fantastic bot where you just asked it, where is Dan Felix today? It'll automatically tell me back where he's working from home. Simple things like that, very easy to implement with support. Making full use of Office 365 licensing. I went through in our presentation that some elements are restricted based on license, but then it's understanding, well, what does my license give me? What do I need to add into my license? As you can appreciate, Microsoft 365 does not make it easy with their licensing. And on next week's webinar, I'm specifically going to go through the licensing stacks of Microsoft. There are 1,412, I think there are different license SKUs within Microsoft, so it is a very complicated environment, but we can help make easy. And then, of course, your cloud communications journey. Teams is a collaboration tool, and it is also a communications tool, so we can help make it your one and only communications tool across the organization. Be it if you've still got existing on-prem or contact center solutions, we can also interface with. How can we all do that? Well, we can deliver 30-minute free discussions with me and my colleagues on how we can help you, how we can understand your organization better to deliver better solutions for you. Scan the QR code at your leisure, and it will effectively create a meeting request within Microsoft booking system and add me or one of my colleagues on. Free to take questions and answers with Dan now, anytime you want.
Lovely, thanks, Mark. And as Mark said, yeah, the Q&A is now open. We've had one or two questions come through, which I'll touch upon in a second. But in the meantime, if you've got any questions, please feel free to add them in, and I'll read them out to Mark. I think it's fair to say, based off that, it's been a fantastic presentation from Mark. Teams is an incredibly powerful tool, and we did a webinar Thursday last week, which we went into a lot more detail about a lot of new functionality that's coming through with Teams. But I think it's fair to say, in order to make sure that as businesses we're all using it as how we want to use it, because every business is unique, the setup, the permissions, the administration side is crucial. I used to work with a colleague who, when Teams first came out, was very excited by it, as we all were, but would literally create Teams for creating Teams' sake, really, channels and sites. And that's where the Team Sprawl term really came from, the people doing that rather than taking a more proactive approach to it and a more disciplined approach to it. So like I said, having that administration side, having that control ensures that we all as individual users will see greater adoption and greater usage of it. So like I said, we've had a question through already. But please have if any other questions, please start sending them through. The question came from Dan. Can you merge distribution lists? So I'll read that again. Can you merge distribution lists and Office 365 groups?
That's a good one. I've seen that one quite a few times, and I've been asked that a few times. Short answer, no. Microsoft has not made it possible to merge the two into one, particularly if they are named the same. If they're named differently and you want to have a merge, there is a way to do it PowerShell, but very simplistically put, no. The easiest path is upgrade, choose one over the other, bearing in mind that DLs are only really just lists of names, whereas O365 groups have a lot more content to them.
Thanks, Mark. Next question is from Barry. Is DLP included with the standard Office 365 pricing structure, or is it an extra bolt-on?
Very good. I would say wait and see, because I'll go through it next week. But in a short term, no. There are some elements that are included within the standard subscription, but the bits that you really want to have are an extra bolt-on license, which I'll go through next week.
Lovely, that's great. Please have questions coming through. If you've got any more questions to ask. As Mark said, what we can offer as an organisation, we can help integrate your team's environment into your business, whether using it or not at the moment. If you are using Skype for Business and that's been your mainstay of communication, now is that time to start thinking about it. And I remember when Microsoft first announced that Skype for Business was going to be shelved, and actually a lot of the functionality they've been absorbing from Skype for Business. It felt a long time off, but crikey, it's come around really, really quickly.
It has.
Just whilst we see if there are any other questions coming through, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of the events and webinars we've got going on. As Mark mentioned, we've got 2 other webinars happening, one this week and one a week today. On Thursday, it's very much an end-user focused webinar. It's about making the most of your Microsoft 365 experience and usage. You'll be really surprised what applications are available to you, aside from the usual Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, Excel. Aside from them, like I said, there's other applications that are available for you to use. And actually, you probably, as an organisation, might be, incurring extra costs on a tool, on another service, which actually comes as part of Microsoft 365. For instance, you might be using a SurveyMonkey or something similar. But are you aware that Microsoft 365 comes with Forms, which is a survey gathering tool. Or then a week today, really for IT managers and IT administrators, it's a webinar about how to improve your management of the M365 environment. Again, as Mark mentioned, that's more of a deeper look into the back end of Microsoft 365, the security tools that come alongside it, the administration side, to help you take better control of your environment. We also have I've just seen we've got a question come through, so we'll just do the question before we move on to the next slide. This one's from Steve Hool. Decrease team sprawl, one team with private channels or multiple teams?
Depends on the circumstance. One team with private channels is good from a SharePoint permissions perspective, but can get quite messy with inheritance. So it can be easier with multiple teams, but it's entirely dependent on your circumstance and your requirements. Yeah,
I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Mark, that a team's environment, as we've mentioned, is very unique to each business. It's how your business operates, as opposed to saying this is a set way of doing it.
Yeah, definitely so.
Yeah. So yes, thanks for that question, Steve. So one last thing, I just want to provide some further information, is we have some additional resources available to you, ready to download. The first one is a guide on how to plan your IT workplace modernization 2021. That follows on from a webinar that we did, Mark and I did last week, which was around continuing your communication and collaboration transformation 2021. 2020, as we all know, was an interesting year, to say the least. We all had to adapt to new ways of working. I'm still working from home. Mark's still working from home. I think pretty much everyone, in a lot of the cases, is still working from home where possible. And that sort of theory and that process will continue in 2021. But actually, it will start to become a little bit more of a hybrid approach to working, mixing between offices where we all have to socially distance, be careful about each other's health and well-being, but at the same time working from home, but also remaining productive, collaborative and communicative. And that we started in 2020, it's about continuing that in 2021. So that guide is available for you. We also have a Microsoft Teams and Office 365 end user guide that just looks into some of the details, some of the functionality available to both across both systems. That's more of an end user guide more than anything. And that's kind of it, guys. So like I said, look, we've got some other webinars coming up. We hope you join them next week. We'll make sure you all get a copy of today's slide deck from Mark. We'll also provide you a link to our on-demand version of this same webinar, so you can look back at it at your own leisure if you want to pick anything up. We're available to help. We're free to help. Please use the QR code that Mark's provided, or speak to your account manager or your contact owner. If you need any help or support, we're here to help. We can develop Teams infrastructures for your business. We also have our SharePoint development team as well. And as Mark's talked about during this, the two are intrinsically linked. But leaves me to say thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much.